Our guest today has most distinguished credentials. Jeff Fager has been the executive producer of 60 Minutes since June 2004. In his first 3 seasons at the helm, he led 60 Minutes to a #1 finish amongst its competitors. For his work on the broadcast, the Producers Guild of America voted him the best producer in nonfiction television 2 years in a row. Before taking over 60 Minutes, he is credited with guiding 60 Minutes 2 to overwhelming critical acclaim as its executive producer. In just 7 seasons, the broadcast garnered 9 Emmy Awards and a host of other broadcast accolades. As the executive producer of the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather from 1996 to 1998, Fager led the broadcast's highly praised rededication to hard news, enterprising reporting, and increased foreign coverage. Prior to that, he was the senior broadcast producer for the CBS Evening News and covered many major international stories, including the war in Bosnia and the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Fager had been a producer for 60 Minutes from 1989 to 1994, primarily working with correspondents Morley Safer and Steve Croft, and covered several major world events, including the Gulf War with Iraq in 1991. He was also part of the original team that launched 48 Hours, the primetime CBS news magazine. He began his broadcasting career in 1977 after graduating from Colgate University with a BA degree in English. He is also the father of Middlebury Senior. Is that a fair characterization? Senior.
Senior/junior.
Senior/junior, Nick Fager. His talk today is entitled The Winning Formula of 60 Minutes, Staying on Top by Covering the War While Ignoring Britney Spears. Following his talk, he's graciously agreed to hold a brief career conversation with interested students. So the way this will work is, I think after about 50 minutes or so, we will break momentarily for just 2 minutes and then reconvene as a smaller group for students who are interested in discussing careers in television or the media in general. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jeff Fager to Middlebury College.
Thanks. Thanks. That's very nice. I love coming to Middlebury, mostly to see Nick, and this is a great excuse to do that. I think he's here. He didn't skip this class, did he? Pay attention, Nick. Don't drift off, even though you may know this material. Could learn something. It's true that McCardle roped me into this. He's to blame. The truth is we've got a story about John McCardle and his campaign, which is just fascinating and I think is going to include some Middlebury kids as well. And it's coming up in the near future on 60 Minutes. I'm not going to tell you which Sunday, so you'll have to watch until it shows up. But John is obviously terrific in that, and we look forward to finishing it. But I always look forward to the opportunity to not just get away. I mean, what a beautiful place. New York is a little crazy, especially in my life right now with this campaign and the war. And we have some issues with the war that I'll talk to you about a little bit that have become really testy and difficult, not to mention testy and difficult with the campaign, which has been, and it's very interesting right now for you all because Vermont is part of Tuesday, and Tuesday, of course, could be the big day. But my experiences with the campaign, I'll save it for questions if anybody's interested, but I think are somewhat revealing of the kind of leader each of these people are. And there's some interesting tidbits about that. We're actually interviewing Barack and Hillary this week in Ohio for a story about Ohio on Sunday's broadcast in advance of the vote on Tuesday. Ohio, I think, is just such an interesting place for so many reasons. It becomes so much a part of each election for different reasons, and I think it's just an amazing microcosm of the country and has just about every major issue you can imagine. We wanted to have Bill Clinton be part of it, but the Clinton campaign asked us to please not do that if we wanted to speak with Senator Clinton, so he's not going to be in it. But it should be very interesting, I think, especially in terms of the economy and jobs and foreclosures. It's all there, and losing jobs, these issues these people care very much about and are going to play into the general election as well. But anyway, this is an opportunity to talk about my favorite subject, 60 Minutes, and I try to get out and do it at least once a month. And it's my favorite subject. We're proud of it. It's really been an amazing string, 40 years now on primetime television, which is the longest running television show, period, in primetime, by a lot. I mean, I think the next one is 25 years on TV. And, you know, it's a long and it's a rich tradition started by Don Hewitt, creator of 60 Minutes, who actually happens to be best pals with Felix Rohatyn, the man who built this building and this program that looks so good. Interestingly enough, we are really literally direct descendants of Edward R. Murrow at 60 Minutes. It's a tradition that really Don brought along, and it's a culture that we protect and we care about a lot. Don used to say for years that it's a combination of high Murrow and low Murrow, and that's basically what he created. Murrow always did important documentaries. He covered important stories. He shed light on big subjects that needed it. And he also interviewed celebrities. And he would do, he had two prominent shows doing each thing, and Don thought, why not combine it all into one magazine? He thought of it also as a kind of life magazine. And it's amazing how that formula has succeeded, and Don taught us all very well. It's a great organization, but it takes an amazing effort to keep it together and to keep the kind of consistency that you need to attract the following that we have. So the title of this, Tim asked me what do you want to call it, and I didn't really know, but I knew we wanted it to be about international, and God knows we do a lot of international. So I came up with it, which is the winning formula at 60 Minutes, staying on top by covering the war while ignoring Britney Spears. We do all of those things. We ignore Britney Spears, and that's the easy part. But we do cover the war, and we cover it quite extensively, and we are on top. We're way on top. I mean, we have a massive audience. In fact, in a year's time, my favorite statistic is we're the most watched broadcast in the country in 1 year. 100 million people watch it at one point or another, even if they just watch one broadcast. But week to week, we're generally in the top 10, and our nearest competitor is 60th or 70th out of 150 shows. So we're proud of it, and the reason for the title, staying on top and succeeding by covering the war, is that the conventional wisdom in broadcast journalism is the war is a turnoff, which is hard to believe, almost outrageous to say it, considering how important it is and how much we all should care about it and know about it. I'll get to that in a bit. But just to give you a little bit of background on the broadcast, people are always curious about it. We basically do 100 stories a year. Someone came to me today and said there might be some ideas coming my way today, which is fine. That's the way I spend most of my days. We field thousands of ideas in a year and end up with 100 stories. We probably take 1,000 ideas seriously and look into them and end up reporting 100. We have about that many reporters at 60 Minutes, 100 people. That counts cameramen, that counts videotape editors, associate producers, producers, and the reporters who happen to be on the air. Everybody's chasing stories all of the time, and it's part of what we like to develop. We don't, this does dovetail in several ways. The first part of this discussion with the career counseling part, which will be interesting later on, but we generally don't take people right out of college at 60 Minutes, but we take them after they've proven themselves as reporters somewhere. And when they do come and end up doing the kind of schlep work that we have, it always includes reporting as well. So everybody's always kicking around ideas. It's a spirited place that way, and that's important. And eventually we decide, and I have to decide what story we are definitely going to pursue and what we're not. So that's a daily battle that goes on as well, because people can get passionate about what they want to do, and it's an adult place, so Generally, if someone feels very strongly about covering a certain story, they get to do it. The time, it takes about 2 months per story, average, to begin from start to finish. I think John McArdle would probably know more about his story. I think it's going to be 2 to 3 months before from the moment we started to the moment we air. We spend years on some stories. We spend months and months reporting some stories. Every Sunday can be a real mix of that. This Sunday we'll have a story on. The Ohio story is basically 2 weeks old. We launched it a week ago in anticipation of that big Tuesday. The other 2 stories, one of them is about 5 months in, and it's an amazing story about actually relating also to the campaign, and that it's about healthcare. It's what's called a expeditionary clinic that generally goes to places like Ecuador and poor regions of the world and sets up shop with volunteer doctors and provides free health care for a short period of time, a weekend, a week. And they've actually started finding as much need in the United States as anywhere else. And so we catch up with them in Tennessee, where they've opened up shop and set up a full-scale clinic, and before daylight, hundreds of people are waiting outside the gate to get free health care. So that's a very interesting story and has been in the works for quite some time. Another one is, the third one this Sunday, is a new weapon that the Pentagon is testing involving, it's a ray gun, in effect, which stops people in their tracks without killing them. And what's ironic about that story is the Pentagon's having a real tough time. They don't quite know what to do with a weapon that doesn't kill. Because its proponents in that part of the Pentagon that comes up with new weapons believe it would save thousands of lives in Iraq alone. So it looks like an interesting broadcast. But again, it takes a varying amount of time depending on the story, and a huge amount of difference in terms of money, which I'm going to get to as well. I'm going to show you a videotape for those who haven't had a chance to see us in the past couple of years. I think it gives a very good sort of short indication of what we're up to and sort of what I believe in terms of running this broadcast, which is making sure that it's always current, making sure that we're covering important stories, making sure that we've got a lot of original reporting in our broadcast, making sure we're telling people something they didn't know, and as well, not just doing the important story, doing stories that are just plain interesting, doing profiles of interesting people, and mixing it up so that it's not just, this Sunday actually seems like it's got less of a kind of Life magazine mix, a lot more intense, which is fine, and I think it's going to be worth it. But we also like to mix it up, and I think that's what you'll see on this videotape. The important thing to tell you about it is that it's not comprehensive. This is a tape, this is a promotional vehicle. We use it to show really to our affiliates at a meeting annually and update it occasionally. We have a relationship with Tokyo Broadcasting, which is very important to us. So we updated it to show it to them at the time of this contract being renewed a couple of weeks ago. So it's relatively up to date. And, but just so you know, it's promotional. It's a way of showing our people in the field the kinds of stories we cover. And let's have a look. No, that's not the top.
I'm not going to try to be...
There you go.
It's the Sunday night tradition enjoyed by millions.
Wow, we are right in the middle of this thing.
We went with them on a raid.
We joined the president on board his helicopter, Marine One.
I'm not going to try to be popular
and change principles to do so.
You're not very popular in the country right now, Dave.
Exactly right.
In 3 weeks, we can cure a kid that is looking like they're half dead.
Our search turned into a remarkable journey into a place we were forbidden to travel.
We asked the Sudanese government for permission to come into Darfur, but we didn't get it.
People want to know from you, from Blackwater, that you wish those people had not been killed.
They're pressing us to end the interview. Just a few moments.
Nobody can be pressing us because I'm the president.
Every day, we're hearing another story about your wife. What's going on? Sarkozy decided the interview was over.
There have been suggestions, particularly amongst Benazir supporters, that you may have had a hand in her killing.
The whole population could be destroyed.
Helicopter units like this one are spread out all over Iraq. Speed is everything.
No one dies on the back of my helicopter.
Did you ever hear about anything that happened to anyone with whom you had contact as a result of the leak?
Yes, I have, and that's all I can say.
Can medication make a prisoner sane enough to be executed?
Do you know why you're getting this medication?
Yeah, I'm nuts.
Are you equating these frozen embryos with a full-grown man or woman?
People say you're an evil empire bent on world domination. You said...
I hate that. White chocolate mocha. Caramel macchiato. Where does this stuff come from? You're making this up.
I didn't meet one single mean dog. Is this his head up there?
That's his head.
So you created a gay rat.
A lot of people are spending a lot of money to give good luck or sorry.
25 years, Mike. You think I'd get an inch of respect? How can you prove your innocence?
Apparently you haven't done it yet.
I hate when that happens.
And when do you have U.S. forces on the ground to secure that border?
Yeah, I think that's clear.
You have called your Republican colleagues, now, these are quotes, immoral, corrupt. You say they're running a criminal enterprise.
Actually, when I called them those names, I was being gentle.
$500,000 came out of this. So it just seemed to me that for a relatively small amount of money, we could have a huge impact.
We haven't seen CO2 levels like this in how long?
In hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions.
Is there any doubt in your mind that there is a connection between people working at Ground Zero and then getting sick?
There's no doubt in my mind at all about that.
You never said that you found DNA belonging to other men.
No, I did not specifically state that.
Shouldn't that have been in the report?
Every mother of a son in this country should be scared to death.
If you're going to be strong on the radio, you got to let it all out.
If this is the executive suite, what does it say about the corporation?
Why do you still tour?
Do it because of the way it makes me feel and the way that I can make you feel when I do it. When did you figure out that you two were going to end up together?
Oh, Big 60 Minutes is ready for that.
The most eligible bachelor in America.
It's very flattering. But at the same time, I don't think I sleep any better at night.
You mean like alone or not alone?
One article said that you enjoyed blondes, but loved the company of Johnny Walker Red even more. Is there any truth to it?
No.
You like the blondes better?
Yeah. There's this tremendous interest in to maintain it. You're going to have to start winning tournaments.
You never lose that fun, that passion to compete and live a dream. And I'm able to do that.
Come on, 60 Minutes.
It's the most successful television program ever. 60 Minutes. Setting the standard and raising the bar.
To the next level!
This season promises even more.
I'm Bob Simon.
I'm Anderson Cooper.
I'm Scott Kelly.
I'm Leslie Stahl.
I'm Steve Croft.
I'm Laura Logan.
I'm Morley Sager. I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Katie Couric. Those stories and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes.
We're always looking ahead to the next big story. 60 Minutes, the tradition of excellence, continues.
So you see the variety. I mean, which is obviously important. This is part of the mix that I was talking about, which is what we try to achieve every week. You know, but I think I think the most important aspect of this discussion is to talk about the harder international stories and why we don't see a lot of competition on that front in terms of primetime American television. And I guess the best place to start is the war, which is what I mentioned earlier. We actually did a count, which is that up to date we've done, since the war broke out, almost 100 stories, which is comes really right down to almost one in five, which is a lot of coverage. And I think the importance of doing it, to me, is obvious. I mean, we are extended in two places right now that say a lot about the country, and so much is going on there that is difficult to see. The people who cover Iraq for us find themselves in very dangerous situations on a regular basis. I can't talk about it to any large degree right now, but we have one reporter, a producer who was working for us in Basra, who was kidnapped 2 weeks ago with his interpreter, and they set the interpreter free, but we are in a daily grind trying to get Richard Butler, a reporter who works for us based in Britain, out of the hands of kidnappers in Basra. It's just a crazy situation, and I think in part that's why you don't see a lot of people covering the war outside of the Green Zone in Baghdad, which is the protected area within the walls of the American compound and embassy, because it's so dangerous, and you can understand why it's hard to put people on the ground there. At the same time, it really is in some ways the definition of news, which is anything, according to Lord Beaverbrook, the best definition, I think, the British press lord, who said anything that somebody's trying to hide and all else is advertising. I think it's probably better put. Think about it. It does make a lot of sense, by the way. I mean, so many people are coming at us, to put something out, a message that they want to get out. But when we're doing our job in terms of real news, we're uncovering something. And even if it's not something that someone's trying to hide, it might be something that someone doesn't want you to see. In terms of Iraq stories that we've broken over the recent years, I think probably the most difficult was Abu Ghraib, and that was one of the most difficult times in my life. A story we worked on for 4 or 5 months, and ended in a real ugly fight with the Pentagon because they tried to keep us from running it and held back an important interview from us in the process, which eventually we won. They gave us the interview, it aired, and it was obviously a very important story to get on. But I think that there's another part of this which is a little bit more cynical, which is that the conventional wisdom in broadcasting and broadcast journalism, I think, is that the war and the international reporting, but specifically the war, is a turnoff to the American viewer. And that's, I think that's a fact. I think that people really avoid it for that reason, and I think international coverage in general, in a country that I think has typically not done a lot of it, is hard to find for that reason as well. That's, I think, the most significant reason in terms of the war. It's also incredibly expensive to do. Our costs are enormous when it comes to covering the war. The commitment that CBS Inc., CBS Corp, has to 60 Minutes is enormous. The amount of money that goes in and gets invested in our broadcast, we are among the most expensive broadcasts on the air for that reason, because we want to cover the stories that we know people who see that stopwatch expect when they're watching our broadcast. There's got to be, as I said, that mix, but there have got to be important stories that we've taught people, we've educated, we've informed, and we've shed some light. I do think that I find it unusual that at this day and age, when we are so exposed internationally, that it is so hard to find in other places. And there's another factor, though, which is that I think part of our culture at 60 Minutes is that the writing is so important and the storytelling is so important, which is also something that dovetails with this career discussion. We hire great writers, and there aren't a whole lot of them to go around. I don't think that we're very good at teaching our kids how to write well. And people don't think television is necessarily the place for writers, but it's all about storytelling. And the whole culture of 60 Minutes has always been, we can tell any story. There's no limit to what story we can tell. You just have to tell it damn well. Then you have to make it interesting. And so the work ethic at 60 Minutes is intense. And the level of scrutiny over every sentence, over every word, over every line, over every paragraph, over every quote is intense and takes many, many screenings and ends in shouting matches often, but is worth it because I think that's a huge part of what makes it good is that we don't limit what story we're going to tell. We'll tell any story we feel like telling, and we'll just figure out a really good way to tell it. And I think beyond that, if you watch the broadcast, you'll see that it's not issue-driven, really. It's story-driven or people-driven. We don't cover issues well. We cover microcosms well. And it's something that Don actually said years ago that I quote all the time. I love it. It's one of my favorite quotes. Noah is a hell of a lot more interesting than flood control. It's true. I think back to the point about trying to shed information, about trying to get to the truth, which is, I think, every reporter's dream come true, that you're going to come upon a story that nobody's heard about that's going to make a big difference. We've had a couple of famous ones in recent years. One of my favorites was the Duke story, because the Duke story was, I think, the worst of journalism. Showed the worst of what this country's press can do, because everybody jumped on that bandwagon. This fits the stereotype. These kids are guilty. And is a nightmare, I think, for those people, and still is and will be for a long time to come. We put one of our best reporters on the scene, producer Michael Radutsky, who stayed there off and on, spent more time in Raleigh-Durham than most students, and came up with... started to uncover some frightening facts that led to that. And of course, so that's the dream come true for a producer, that you're challenging, not only turning conventional wisdom upside down, but you're saving these kids from going to jail. I mean, in its basic form, that's the gratification. And so I think that I'm going to show another DVD here because I want to save some time for questions, but this is just an example, I think, of the kind of story that you don't find elsewhere, except you find it in print, you don't find it on TV, because it's very hard to tell. We wanted to do a story about corruption in Iraq, and our producer started finding more and more interesting facts. And this story actually was just awarded with the DuPont Award, which is the broadcast version of the Pulitzer. And you'll see a clip of it. It's just about 3 or 4 minutes, so it doesn't give you the full scale of it, the full scope of it, the kind of corruption that's been going on there. And are you ready with that one? We're in the process of updating this, and I'll talk about that briefly when you finish seeing it.
International banker took over as Iraq's Minister of Finance last year, he was confronted with a gaping hole in the Treasury. $1.2 billion had been withdrawn by the new Ministry of Defense to supply the Iraqi army with desperately needed equipment to fight the growing insurgency. Millions had been misspent on old and antiquated equipment, and Alawi says most of the money simply disappeared.
How much do you think was stolen?
I think the figure is probably between $750 and $800 million.
It's a lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money, by any standard.
The story begins in June 2004, when presidential envoy Paul Bremer turned over authority to the interim Iraqi government, which would run the country until elections could be held. The insurgency was already gaining momentum, and with the newly constituted Iraqi army riding into battle in unarmored pickup trucks and scrounging for guns and ammunition, the Iraqi Defense Ministry went on a billion-dollar buying spree with almost no oversight. The contracts were paid in advance with no guarantees, and most of them involved a single company.
They were awarded without any bidding to a company that was established a few months prior with a total capital of $2,000.
The name of that company was Alain Aljaria, which in Arabic means the ever-flowing spring. Its address here in Amman, Jordan was a post office box, its telephone number, a mobile phone. The principal was a mysterious Iraqi by the name of Nair Jumaili, and $500 million in Iraqi defense funds would eventually find their way into his private account at the Housing Bank of Jordan. The exact whereabouts of that money and the whereabouts of Mr. Jumaili are presently unknown. The person who knows the most about the case, in fact the only person who seems to be investigating it, is Judge Rohatyn al-Radi, Iraq's Commissioner of Public Integrity. Judge Rohatyn was more than happy to walk us through the case. Aside from the hundreds of millions of dollars that were stolen, Rohatyn says much of the equipment actually delivered to the Iraqi military was useless junk. Soviet-era helicopters, some of which were considered unfit to fly, bulletproof vests that fell apart after a few weeks, and a shipment of ammunition so old one of the people inspecting it feared it might blow up.
Instead of getting planes and tanks and vehicles and weapons that we needed, we got materials there really was not a big need for.
In October 2005, Judge Rohatyn obtained arrest warrants for some of the top officials in the Ministry of Defense, and almost all of them fled the country, including former Defense Minister Hazem Shalan, who is believed to be in Europe or the Middle East. We did manage to locate one of his top deputies, Ziad Katan, who was in charge of military procurement. We found him in Paris, happy to be there, and not terribly concerned.
All equipment with this $1.2 billion, it is nowadays in Iraq.
It was delivered to
I
Iraq.
have documentation, I give it to you in your hand.
Well, this is a big misunderstanding. I mean, we're talking about $800 million.
Yes, it is here. I can show you. This is BTR, this is BTR 80 from Hungarian.
Well, this isn't equipment, this is just pictures of it.
Yeah, but if you can prove it, if you want to.
But the thing that really suggests this wasn't on the up and up are these audio recordings, which we obtained from a former associate of Ziad Katan and the mysterious middleman Nair Jumaili.
Hello, good morning. My name is Dr. Ziad Katan, Deputy Secretary General, Minister of Defense.
Is that your voice?
Yes.
So I just talked with him.
This is Katan talking about a top political advisor to the defense minister, a man who is also identified on the recordings as a representative of the president and the prime minister of the interim government.
He wants to know.
He wants to know how much they are going to place in his account?
Yes, of course.
How much?
$45 million.
He wants to know how much money is going to be placed in his account. You say
want-
$45 million.
Yes, but not dollar. I don't say dollar.
And what was it? $45 million what?
I don't remember.
You're going to give him $45 million of something.
Yes, but I don't remember what the matter was.
It's really incredible. I encourage you to look for it in the future. We're going to run it probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks. It actually is entangled with this kidnapping in terms of when we actually do run it. But the amazing thing and the scary thing and the upsetting thing about the story is that a lot of the money that is being siphoned off, or was siphoned off and still is ending up in the hands of insurgents. So basically what you're seeing is American money, taxpayer money, that's being used to kill American soldiers. That's just happening. There's no doubt about it, and it's a frightening, real problem. So I wanted to open it up to questions. I'm sure there's more to talk about, but does anybody have anything? We've got about 10 minutes before we go to the next.
Yeah, I had a question about the threshold that you guys used when deciding on whether you're going to go with the story or not. Say if you had the same information that the New York Times had on with the John McCain story that they put out recently, would 60 Minutes have run the story?
You know, I really don't agree with what the Times did. I think on some front, it's very important that if someone that plays is running for office as the cleanest and sort of anti-lobby person, then all bets are off. I mean, the scrutiny should be on him to be, consistent in his practices. The suggestion that there might have been a relationship with the lobbyist, I think, is far-fetched in terms of the proof they offered, and I bet they regret that was in there. But I think the trouble with John McCain is that if you look at it, I mean, I think 95% of the time he's done an amazing job of fighting off the special interests, compared to probably 20% of the average, I think. So I'm not sure that it was fair to him, truthfully. I don't think it would have reached the threshold. It's a little different in that daily newspaper. They have a lot of space, and we're dealing with 3 stories a week. There, but for the grace of God, go I, because you end up as the editor in the middle of, sometimes you lose sight of the forest through the trees. And one of the things that I value and try very hard to protect as the person who's editing the copy is to keep fresh eyes and to look at something when the team believes it's complete, which is, yeah.
In the Abu Ghraib thing that you were being denied an important interview. Have you all ever been shut down on something that you wanted to show?
Yeah, we make a point of saying nobody can really shut us down, but it's hard sometimes when you don't have cooperation. I mean, every White House, I don't care who it is, uses access as a sort of wedge to, or a threat. And so, yeah, we've been shut down. And, you can't do a candidate. You can't do a candidate unless you're doing a story about a candidate. You can't help your audience better understand what that person stands for unless you do an interview with them. Now, that's...
Pressured to not run a particular story?
Oh, yeah, all of the time. All of the time. No. Last week we had amazing pressure on a story we ran on Sunday about Governor Siegelman of Alabama, who's in jail now. Pretty good story that's followed it because we aired it on Sunday in Alabama. There was an enormous amount of pressure on us, both to run it and not to run it. I was reading stories about how I had spiked the story, killed it, before I even screened it. I mean, that's how intense the scrutiny was. And it was a hard story to tell. It's one of those stories that we rewrote a dozen times because it was complicated and difficult, and in TV you don't get a chance to go back and read it again. There it is. You better be able to follow it. So, but the interesting follow-up to that story is that on Sunday night in Alabama station in Huntsville, a CBS station, the first 12 minutes of 60 Minutes was in black. And they claimed that it was a satellite error. Originally they claimed it was from CBS, but of course, we feed it to 100 stations at a time. And Huntsville, Alabama was the only one with a problem. They said it ended up being the dish on their roof or something, and I feel sorry for the news director there because obviously she said she's been in hell ever since. They ran the story at 10 o'clock that night. But the fallout has been amazing. I've got a stack of email on my desk in favor of that story that thick. So many people think he was railroaded into jail because of his politics.
This alludes to a couple things you just mentioned, but there's a lot of talk, people who study journalism, about the differences between what you can do in print versus what you can do in TV. You just referred to one, that you can't really read in television. And I'm curious, are there stories and topics that you would like to cover, but you feel like you can't because of the medium? You can't get visuals, you can't get footage that would suggest this.
Right.
So what types of things would, if you could, do it in another medium, 60 Minutes be covering?
I don't think we would. No, I really think that we try our hardest to forget about that. In fact, one thing that we always tell ourselves is that if you could just hear it and you couldn't see it, it should work. And in fact, the broadcast does very well on the radio as a simulcast. A lot of people listen to it on Sunday nights in their car. So I don't think so. I don't think so. We really pride ourselves in saying we can do any story that we really want to do, regardless of the fact that it's television. And I really think that sets us apart.
Is CBS or 60 Minutes doing anything concrete to encourage
colleges to encourage journalism as a career? I mean, I know today we're all very concerned about the fact that we don't have enough engineers, we don't have enough scientists, we're falling behind other countries. But you know, you mentioned that you really don't have a big field to pick from for journalists. Is there? What do you suggest we do about it?
I actually think there are a lot of people going into it. I was saying I find it difficult to find good writers. I think a lot of people go into journalism who aren't good writers. Yeah, and so that is a distinction. But there's a long line outside 60 Minutes of people who want to come to work there. A long, long line. And the standard is very high. It's part of the reason we have, I think, such a higher payroll. We have to, you know, we pay people better. We hire better people. We have a high standard. And I just find it really rare that someone's a terrific writer and has been trained, as I think you get trained at Middlebury. I think it's rare. I mean, you know, I learned how to write at Colgate. You know, and I know that the discipline here is intense and so important. This is such a great language school that's a tremendous benefit for any people who go into journalism. Huge. 99%, I believe. Because I believe the TV part is easy. You know, and some people have more talent than others in crafting a story on television, but it's the storytelling that matters.
Building on the Times issue, could you say a little bit about your standards of proof? In other words, when do you feel you're ready to go with a story?
Well, I think Abu Ghraib is a great example of that. You have pictures. They show up in my office one day. Well, 2 months after we heard about them, it took us that long to get them. And it was a tip that we got from a source who we'd been working with before, that these pictures existed. You have pictures of something like that happening, and we're all familiar with them now. I was the first one to see them. They're on my desk, and who's to prove? How do you prove that that's an American soldier doing that to an Iraqi prisoner in Abu Ghraib prison outside Baghdad, Iraq? With all that can be done to photos, with all that can be done, God knows what it was. One big trap, one big, you know, phony story. There were other such stories that came out of, you know, futzing with photos, and I think the famous CBS documents case, which is an upsetting chapter in CBS history, was about the same. Those were Xeroxes, those documents. They never should have used those because they were Xeroxes. You can do anything with those. So, but the Abu Ghraib is an interesting. It took us months to find 2 sources on each picture. Someone who was in the room and knew they were taken. Someone who knew the camera. So, in other words, both of those count, and I can't go into how that sourcing happened, but it's really the onus is on you to have 2 sources, and not just take someone's word for something like that. It varies. I mean, it's not a perfect science, and you are going to end up with stories that are he said, she said, but the burden of proof is on us, not on the viewer. You know, we're not supposed to show something that we think might be accurate. We have to completely vet it and make sure it's accurate before we put it on. And for me, not being first is not the issue. I mean, we won't be first if that's one of the biggest dangers. The 2 biggest dangers in journalism, I think, trying to be first ahead of everybody, and the other one is going into a story with a preconceived notion, trying to prove a point that you believe is so. This is totally opposite of what we're supposed to be about. We're supposed to go in without any hidden agenda, without any sense of how it might end up, and report all sides of a story.
You don't think the point of many of your stories is implicit?
How do you mean?
Well, to me, one of the techniques of 60 Minutes is the ambush, where on camera you surprise somebody as you're headed in this clip. It seems to me that story, for example, tells the viewer what ought to be thought about the subject.
We really don't do ambushes anymore. Haven't done them for years. It was a stock and trade. Which one are you talking about?
The guy where you played the recording.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, but I mean, you see, that's a case where, yes, I guess you could call that an ambush. But here's a guy who, you know, he could have said, you know, that's not my voice. He could have said, and we played in this recording that we had, and it seemed to me, yeah, he implicated himself in that. He's the one who confirmed that tape was him. So, I'm not sure what your question is there.
Well, that was an example of, it seems to me there are many stories where it's not, here are the facts, you make up your own mind. It seems to me they lead the viewer in a particular direction.
That's right. We could spend a lot of time going into what Judge Roddy found out about Catan and why he fled the country. You know, in the interest of a 12.5-minute piece, there are limits. In the interest of a 4-column piece, there are limits. So that's right. We definitely, I believe that the viewer expects the most of us in terms of vetting a story and will accept that we've done it and we've done our job, and we might have to cut some corners in telling you all the facts, but you heard enough there to know that I think that this guy had a problem.
Do you ever compensate the people that you interview, and if
No.
so, how? No?
Never have, and never will. That'll happen probably when I get fired for something. The next guy in the job will bring Britney Spears on the air and pay her to be there.
Have you ever had to withhold a story? Let's say you get a leak or something like that, and it would just be, I don't know, undemocratic, but like too confidential to use in that situation.
Yeah. Part of that, part of the Abu Ghraib story did get that way, did get into that. The Army asked me, please hold it for a week because we've got hostages right now. We held it for a week. We were waiting for the interview that they'd promised us, and they said, we'll give it to you next week, but just please, this would be horrible for these people in jail right now. And in the interests of their lives, we held it. And we didn't have the interview we needed, but I felt that that's something that's important to do. Again, that's about just being citizens, you know, and trying to do the right thing without trying to be first as the most important thing that happens. We held it a second week because we got a direct plea from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs asking us the same thing. The third week I said, you're going to have to give us this interview. We're not going to be able to hold it, so we're going to air it without the interview. And I felt strongly that the Army side should be represented in that story. It was just too powerful. So it all worked out in the end.
Could you speak more about how you go from the 1,000 ideas you have to the 10 programs, and kind of more specifically, how much is your decision affected by what you think people should know and what people you think want to know? So in the Britney Spears example, are you not doing stories because you don't think it's important for people to know about her, or do you think they really don't want to know about her?
No, she's everywhere. So in other words, you know, we don't need to do it, but I do think it's a really good question, and we make judgments all of the time. We don't do market research about what people want to see. We have to make decisions about what we think is important. I think that's a basic and important part of being a journalist. You're not supposed to try to pander. So those decisions are never made that way. And I think there are several different criteria for different kinds of stories. And I think that importance is one. I think value to the viewer is another. I think just plain interesting is always one. I think if there was one common denominator that really does transcend all others, it's this business about original reporting. If it's original, you're not going to find it somewhere else. Our viewers are going to leave knowing something or understanding something, whether it's heavy or sad or happy or funny, that they didn't know before they watched the broadcast. And I think there's value in that. And you know, it doesn't always have to be the end of the world story, the story that's going to save the world. It can be just an inspirational character, an inspirational figure. So there's no science to it, and a lot of times it's about gut. But I think those are some common denominators.
I'm interested how you deal with who is going to be the interviewer for the story. When I turn on 60 Minutes at night and I can see the 3 that are going to show up and it tells me who the interviewer is, I sometimes say, oh, okay, I'm not going to watch that one. Or,
Okay.
yes, I will watch that one.
Is there a particular interviewer that you don't like on 60 Minutes? It's okay. It's an interesting place. It kind of fits back with the discussion that we had earlier about people getting to do what they want. It's an adult shop. So oftentimes when a correspondent will propose an idea, they end up doing the story. That's probably a third of them. Another third of them from their team. Each correspondent has a team of producers and associate producers, and so stories come in very different ways. Sometimes I end up matching them with the correspondent because it just seems like good fit. It's, again, there's no science to that.
And is it within your purview to choose the correspondent to join your show?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've just hired Charlie Rose to come on as part of our broadcast, which I really am happy about, and he's going to shoot his first story in 2 weeks.
Tell us a little bit about Andy Rooney. If he decides to retire, will you replace him with another Andy Rooney type?
Yeah. I'll tell you, I love Andy Rooney so much. I just love him. And, people complain to me that maybe it's time, but I just don't think so. I don't think about, I think about who could be good for that job, and we kick it around sometimes, but I just don't want that to happen. There's some people who sort of, I think, are so iconic that Andy can afford to be bad as well as good. Because you excuse it. You just, you know what, sometimes it just doesn't, oh God, he just didn't work, and I accept that, and I think viewers accept that. And what I find interesting is that, for instance, okay, so I rented a car up in Burlington today, and they saw CBS, and they said, what do you do? And I said, 60 Minutes. I work at 60 Minutes. They said, oh, and this is a 25-year-old girl. She says, Andy Rooney's my favorite person on TV. And it's amazing. I think there is something to, and I think especially college age who like him, and I didn't talk about our Yahoo site. One of the most successful ventures we have is on Yahoo now. A lot of young people click on Andy Rooney in our Yahoo site, and I think there's something about the curmudgeon, something about challenging authority that kids love, and he's good at that. So someday we're going to have to do that. I got to tell you, if something happens to Andy, and he always says, Jeff, it could happen next week, at my age, but I just hope he stays on, and he's doing very well, and I just soon not do anything for a while. I really feel. No, it's all him. 100%. What you see is what you get. And he really is like that, too. He really is like that. If you go up to him and say, could you please sign this, Andy? He'd go, get out of here.
How do you manage the relationship between content and the fact that you're a business? And are you more concerned with the stories you come out with, or with how they're going to be received with your audience, or is there a line that you walk?
Am I concerned about how the audience is going to?
Yeah, because you don't want to alienate your viewers. So
Correct.
Let's say you have too challenging of a story, and then someone turns it off.
I think there are a couple of things there. Business is a very important part of it. We need to do well, otherwise we're not going to be able to keep doing what we do. That's a fact of life. And so I take it week to week. I look at the ratings really carefully. I think upsetting a viewer is about fairness. I really believe that, and fairness is one of my pet peeves. If we're fair in a story, and the principles in a story, whether it's President Bush in this one, and he really felt we treated him fairly. That was the announcement of the surge. Whether it's the president or it's someone on the street in our story, we do our best to treat them fairly, and I think viewers see that. If you're not being fair to someone, that's one of the reasons the ambush ended at 60 Minutes. The really sweaty-faced, I gotcha ambush, which Mike Wallace made famous. Because it was perceived as not being fair, and it wasn't really fair. So I do think it's a good question, because I think that's the experience of watching the broadcast involves several different important things, but journalistically, fairness is the most important. And by the way, there's one trademark of 60 Minutes that is unlike any other broadcast, which is that we have one person devoted to just reading every transcript, everything that's said into tape. So John McArdle's on our story about his issue, and everything he says into that videotape, into that camera, is on transcript, and that person will read every word he says and make sure in the final cut the meaning isn't somehow distorted or lost in the cutting room floor. That's very important. Or that a position that he makes isn't represented. That was an important position to him. And that's all she does. That's 100% of what she does. So that's such an important part of the broadcast.
This is a broader question, but from an international European perspective, a lot of the American media is seen as parochial, and international news is reported from a domestic perspective, that kind of thing, with the notable exception of yourselves and papers like the New York Times. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what needs to be done about that.
About covering the world more?
Yeah, just about the general
Yeah, it goes back to the same issue, I think. Look, when 60 Minutes was the first news program that showed corporate world that you can make money on news. And so, I mean, that was a huge leap. You know, news on television was a public service. It was what you had to do to get your license. So that's all changed, and I think fine, by the way. I mean, you know, look, it's a capitalist society. I'm proud that we do well as a business doing, I think, the stories well and doing the right thing in terms of informing the audience. You can't preach that. You can't sort of legislate that, or you know, it's our country. So I can't speak for why, you know, the others don't you know, cover the news better or cover the foreign affairs better, other than to say what I said earlier, which is it's hard and it's expensive, and I think there's a perception that it's not going to pay off financially.
We're actually going to have to bring this part of our program to a close because we're over time, but we could go on and on. Please join me in thanking Fager.